morning. As you can tell from the title, we're going to touch upon the issue of uncertainty, the issues of uncertainty and infodemic in the context of the pandemic. My talk is particularly relevant to those of you who are interested in the phenomenon of misinformation, especially at the intersection with the pandemic. This talk is nothing short from a springboard for a discussion about the narrative of uncertainty and the uncertainty of the narrative from a non-medical point of view. My goal is to hopefully convince you about three things. The first one is the precariousness of the meta-narrative vis-a-vis a counter-narrative. The second is how the meta-narrative is conducive to uncertainty. And the third one is how those rising narratives are tainted by uncertainty. We will do so by considering three strands of knowledge. A, by considering how meta-narratives are convertible into counter-narratives. B, by making implicit the hypothesis that times of crisis are candidates for the hijack of infodemics. And C, by foregrounding the insight that information does not equal knowledge, which explains the rise in competing information. Let's see how I'm successful at doing that in this presentation. To lay the grounds for this, we must first touch upon the transformative effects of the new media. In the context of the current pandemic, the new media has become an indispensable source of health information, thereby increasing the visibility of unscientific or pseudoscientific information. The wake of COVID-19 saw the spread of information in trusted sources such as social media networks, where people have migrated en masse. Social media is an all-purpose channel, ideal for information dissemination, and networks particularly provide optimal conditions for the spread of this sort. Today, experts are not talking about how much information is being generated, but are already devising ways to counter the spread of infodemics. The word infodemic was first used in 2003 following the crisis of information or information epidemic, which correlated with SARS epidemic. According to the World Health Organization definition of infodemic, an infodemic is both quantifiable and qualifiable. It's too much information and information that has not been filtered through rigorous scientific analysis or evaluation. On that account, spatial dimension does not appear in the definition on account of its infiltration of every corner of the globe. The word infodemics infodemic is featured in a derogatory way. In the Foucauldian sense, it designates wars of information from an asymmetrical power relationship standpoint. However, in its simplest conception, it constitutes a case of contemporary communication in the digital revolution. The remarkable use of it has become so normalized that we now speak about disruptive information or inflammatory content. For present purposes, we will contend with the following definition of infodemics as information of questionable quality. To open our discussion about the human condition, we ought to link it to the crisis of the pandemic. From the very first ever recorded pandemic to COVID-19, the timeline of pandemics indicates that the question of the pandemic is one of temporality rather than probability. And to a great extent, the current pandemic is very indistinguishable from past waves of pandemics. There existed 249 episodes of pandemics throughout history, some of which has altered the history, such as the Black Death, smallpox, Spanish flu, AIDS, etc. And besides the catastrophic death toll and the aftermath that it caused, the similarities lie in how the general responded to the coming of the disease and the kind of scientific and unscientific interpretations that reigned for too long, even within the medical practice, some of which has proven to be difficult to eradicate, hence our exposition of infodemics. Prediction, treatment, justifications are the fertile ground upon which past and present narratives grow into being. It is the unoccupied room of interpretations which abounds in all sorts of explanation. And in the face of a dying Übermensch, the most significant of these interpretations is perhaps a recourse to religious explanation as an encompassing one. This practice still remains with us. For as far back as history goes, the idea implied in the notion of pandemic is that of crisis, which in turn generates disruption and uncertainty. But how relevant uncertainty is in the scholarship on the pandemic. We observe the uncertainty figures in many recent research papers across a wide range of scholastic interests. And to substantiate the above claim, we resorted to Google Scholar to scrape for different journals pertaining to the titles containing any of our keywords of interest, COVID, pandemic, uncertainty, from 2020 onwards. The results are 987, of which 325 published research papers with the word uncertainty in the title. This renders the notion of uncertainty an observable phenomenon. On the aesthetics of non-conformism, uncertainty invites non-conformist attitudes, which then causes or generates purposeful agency. This also, in turn, generates counter-narratives, which is a form of power struggle and form of power balance. The aesthetics of non-conformism equals the mode of representation plus the belief system. This gives us the range of expressiveness, hence infodemics. But why is this the case, one might ask? I would argue that this is because the revolt against control, because man is notoriously flexible and adaptable against an immovable science. The idea that this subtitle, Infodemics as a placebo, encapsulates is one that explains this fixation with narrative construction. An excursion into the therapeutic dimension the counter-narratives provide would suffice our understanding of the historical phenomenon. The logic of narrative construction follows two laws. The first one is a law of necessity, and the second one is a law of intelligibility. The capacity of narratives, and in the context of our presentation, infodemics or counter-narratives, to break the world into the world, to supplement the absence of what ought to be present, to make intelligible phenomena that cannot be understood as a patchwork of incoherent and unfinished story. The case for this is simple. Humans seek order and patterns through which they categorize what's happening instead of remaining subjects to, dare we say, whimsical science, whose narrative does not reflect faithfully any epistemic closure. On the uncertainty of the narrative, Kyle Harper affirms that the rush of new information brings its own kind of uncertainties. And so we are to conclude that uncertainty continues to live on because conflicting narratives generate ceaseless content in addition to information of a non-veridical quality. The dominant cultural and academic discourse reveals ontological insecurity fueled by uncertainty. Conflicting information, in turn, exacerbates uncertainty, and from this perspective, the certainty of the narrative could never be arrived at. It seems like it is a form of mise en abîme. There is uncertainty in the certainty of the subject matter, and there is still uncertainty in what is being circulated and perpetuated. To briefly make the distinction between information and knowledge, knowledge is the structure by which we apprehend the world. On this account, counter-narratives seem to be the epistemic approximation of infodemics or counter-narratives to knowledge. Information, on the other hand, is not meant to be knowledge with capital K in and out of itself. It is identified by it is identified by the elimination of the possibilities, but it can exist with other competing information. To conclude, the most recent corona pandemic and past pandemics offer us a generous understanding of what people give prominence to and how we as species are attuned to compromise on epistemology to achieve a non-conclusive ontological security which appears to exert an enormous grip on us, thus rendering us disenchanted with an intelligibility of the information that is being shoved down upon people. That is the official narrative, the medical information. This paper has given particular focus to the COVID-19 pandemic, to the prominence of the art of narrating the alternative storyline, which we argued ought not to be dismissed as an outdated practice. Thank you.